So good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to session number 6 from our art practice-based research seminar series. I'm really happy about today's session. I'm really delighted to be introducing in a second Dr. Jackie Reynolds and Colette Dobson from Staffordshire University. So today's session is called Research Impact, Making Difference Through Practice-Based Research. Now, before we start, I just have a couple of housekeeping things to remind everyone that, as I said, this is part of a bigger seminar series which is running for the first year. We're already preparing a second round, which will be opened by Agnieszka, who is here in the audience today. Now, there is a dedicated Microsoft Teams for the seminar, so each session from the seminar has a core reading, 1 or 2, which I share with the participants about a week before. They're all uploaded into this seminar series team. So if you're not part of the team and you'd like to be, just let me know and I'll add you in. I also tend to send it by email to everyone who is registered for the session. Now, all the sessions are recorded and they're uploaded to a dedicated YouTube channel. If you'd like to find more details, all the links and the program are available on the website, which is here in the slide. And finally, I'm going to put these links in the chat later, but I'm trying to gauge what kind of people we have here taking part in this seminar. So I created 2 anonymous, very short questionnaires. The first one asks about your research question and what your practice is. And the second asks about training and guidance you've received or you wish you had received. So I'm going to share those links in the chat later. But now, let me introduce our 2 wonderful guests who will be talking about research impact today. So first, I'm really delighted that Colette Dobson has agreed to join Jackie for this session. So Colette has been a creative practitioner for 40 years. She has contributed to many national and international exhibitions, including V&A, National Dutch Museum of Textiles, Koyo Gallery Japan. Her work features in many catalogs and publications, and she has recently retired from lecturing. And she's currently a visiting research fellow at the Staffordshire University. Her research focuses, or her research interests focus on women's health, and she has worked collaboratively with the NHS and cancer patients for over 10 years. She's continuing that approach to support staff at the university in their creative practice and impact research. And currently, Colette is working with Catherine Dyneley on the collaborative photography project, which I'm very curious about, to be honest with you. And then we also have our wonderful Jackie Reynolds, who is the Research Impact Manager at Staffordshire University. And Jackie also co-directs one of our research centers of C3 Research Center, which stands for Creative Industries and Creative Communities. And Jackie provides support, training, and leadership on planning, developing, and evidencing the impact of our research beyond academia, where it should be, as we will hear from today's presentation. So Jackie's PhD is in social gerontology, and her own research interests are in aging, participatory art, and community development. And Jackie has many years of experience of undertaking qualitative, participatory research, often in partnership with artists and using creative research methods. Before returning to staffs in 2018, Jackie was Kills University's very first public engagement with research fellow, which is really impressive. I can definitely attest that Jackie is very passionate about contributing to growing research and impact culture at Staffordshire University. So without further ado, I'll just stop sharing my screen and I'll pass it on to Jackie and Colette. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Agatha. I'm just going to share our screen here. Okay, shouldn't be a minute. There we go. Hopefully you can all see that. Yes. Excellent. Okay, so hello everyone, and thanks for joining us. So Colette and I are both really delighted to be able to present today, and thanks to Agatha for the invitation and for the kind introductions. So in the session today, you've got me talking first, and then Colette. And this is on this slide is a little overview of what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my impact journey, kind of how I ended up being a research impact manager. I'm going to talk a bit about the impact agenda in universities and some of the opportunities and the challenges that that brings, and a little bit about kind of what makes a healthy impact culture. I'm then going to focus specifically on impact and practice-based research, looking at, again, some of the opportunities and some of the challenges. So hopefully this will set the scene nicely, and I'll then hand over to Colette, who will tell you all about her amazing and very impactful collaborative practice-based research. So I'd like to share with you just 3 really brief examples of the kind of research and public engagement initiatives that led me to my current role as research impact manager. So I'm not a practice-based researcher, but my own research background is in the arts and humanities. And my PhD completed in 2011 focused on later life creativity, and I worked for many years on developing impactful participatory research, often in partnership with artists and with creative practitioners. So, and the Doctor Said was a collaborative project involving colleagues at Staffs, Keele, and a team of creative writers. And it involved a series of community workshops that piloted the use of creative writing as a research method to explore people's experiences of health, illness and medicine in North Staffordshire. It was a highly participatory project with the impact being extended through a wide programme of public engagement events and a publication of all of the creative writing that was produced as part of the project. Participants were really actively involved in shaping the project and in disseminating the findings, and that sort of continued for quite a few years after the project had ended. The second example is also an Arts and Humanities Research Council funded project, and that's a cultural value project that I led back in 2014. And this was looking at the role of arts and culture in fostering empathy and compassion and understanding across geographical divides. Again, this was a collaboration between academic colleagues, artists and creative practitioners here in Stoke and also in and near Prague in the Czech Republic. The project looked at how arts and storytelling initiatives really can build that kind of empathy and compassion across the divides. And we created a range of resources which included a series of films by local film company Junction 15, and also a set of what we called caring cards, which were designed by artist Nicola Winstanley and based on the research findings. These resources were all designed to support the work of participatory artists. The third and final example that I just wanted to share with you, just to give you a bit of my background really, is that was the Live Age Festival, which is an annual event that's celebrating later life creativity that I co-founded with my Keele colleague, Professor Miriam Bernard, and Dr. Jill Rezzano, who is Head of Education at the New Vic Theatre. And along with loads and loads of amazing contributions from many artists and cultural organisations, university colleagues, volunteers and community participants. The festival ran every year from 2014 to 2018, and it was really celebrating later life creativity, but was open to people of all ages. And eventually we gained funding from Arts Council England and the Baring Foundation with the New Vic Theatre as lead partner to run a programme called Meet Me at Live Age, which was then a programme of all year round kind of events and training activities, including work in care homes. As I say, there was a massive team of people involved in this work, but I found it really, really rewarding to be a part of. And I think to the extent that by 2018, I realised that I was far more driven by public engagement and knowledge exchange and evaluation and impact and so on than I was by further deepening my subject-specific kind of academic expertise. And that's what led me to my current role of Research Impact Manager, which I really love. And in my role, I support colleagues all across the university as to plan and develop and evidence their research impact. And so just to be clear about what I mean when I talk about research impact, in this context, it's all about the provable effects of research in the real world, so it's or beyond academia. So it's the changes that we can see beyond academia. It could be in society, in the economy, in the environment, which either happen because of our research or else our research has contributed to those changes. And the important thing that I've really kind of emphasised to all the people I work with is that to create impact, we need to mobilise the messages and products from our research to those people who can use them. And to do this, we need to engage with the wider world. And I'll refer to stakeholders in this presentation. When I talk about stakeholders, they're those people that sometimes partners, but sometimes the people who are just using the research and sort of getting positive benefits from it. So, as I say, I wanted to talk a little bit about the impact agenda, as it's become known in higher education. So there's always been impactful research, but in recent years, it's, as I say, it's kind of emerged, it's become known as the impact agenda. And a lot of this has come about due to the Research Excellence Framework, or REF as it's better known. So that's the kind of happens every 7 years or so, a big exercise to assess the quality of research in higher education. So, as many of you may be aware, impact case studies were introduced into REF in 2014, and these are narrative accounts of research impact, and that's impact that's based on high quality underpinning research and crucially supported by independently verifiable evidence. Those case studies are assessed on the basis of their significance and reach, and they're awarded a grade that ranges from unclassified up to 4-star being the maximum, which is for outstanding impact. So, and then in the REF exercise, funding is linked to the 3- and 4-star case studies. So that's what we tend to aspire to. So as I say, REF has played a big part in it, but also with funding, the majority of funders now have much more specific requirements for impact to be fully addressed and require kind of realistic, costed sort of approaches to developing impact. It's at one time it was kind of seen as a bit of an extra, like a separate document, certainly for the UKRI funders. There's a separate document in the funding application, whereas now there's an expectation that impact will be embedded throughout the whole funding bid, sort of fully integrated. And it's a similar case, I think, for many other funders too. There are also now substantial amounts of funding that are awarded by UKRI specifically to support impact acceleration. So this has really, again, put impact under the spotlight. In addition, we now have the Times Higher Education Impact Rankings, and the 4th edition of those will be published next month. And this is where universities report on their contributions to the sustainable, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And these include, but they're not limited to, the university's contributions through research. It's also what they do more widely through teaching and other activities as well. But particularly, it does include can include research too. So that's to give you a bit of an overview of that, so what's become known as the impact agenda. I think there have been positive kind of aspects of the impact agenda, and some of those are recognised as that there has been this increased investment in impact, so that kind of helps researchers if they're looking to make a difference outside academia, that there's more kind of funding and support available for it than there was at one time. Also, it's kind of increased capacity because there are specialist staff. You know, there never used to be roles like mine as research impact manager, but also lots of other people working to different roles to support impact development as well. Much more training and things available now, so that, you know, if you're keen to make a difference, there's more specific support, you know, from about how you can do that, and more kind of awards and recognition and so on for impactful research, and also the creation of boundary organisations. So that's kind of organisations that support the flow of information between policymakers and academics. So some of those kind of important mechanisms have now been set up to kind of facilitate impact in an easier way. So another thing that is kind of recognised as by many as a positive aspect is that there's a certain kind of, it's brought a certain validation for researchers from applied disciplines. And I think if I think back to when I started as a researcher, I've always been very much an applied researcher, but when I started doing that back in sort of 2005-ish, the applied research was kind of didn't quite have the status of sort of more traditional academic research, and whereas now I think because it has the potential to be so impactful, I think it's far more recognised and supported than it was even back then. And just overall, it kind of allows the impact agenda kind of allows academia to justify kind of the public spending on research because of all the benefits that result from it. So there's some of the kind of the perceived opportunities and positive aspects, but it's also brought its challenges as well, that it's important to recognise. So there are concerns about how the impact agenda can kind of narrow perceptions of what's seen as legitimate knowledge and impact. You know, it's I think particularly with REF, it's kind of there's a particular kind of perception of impact that kind of can lead to some impact being seen as easy to fit within a REF case study template, and therefore perhaps that's, you know, the danger is that that's then supported more than equally important research which might be more challenging to kind of, you know, fit in with the impact agenda. There are also concerns that it can contribute to kind of gaming behaviours. So if people start being very instrumental about impact and think I'm just going to work with these people, work with these stakeholders in order to try to develop my impact and achieve an impact case study, so it can kind of, there are concerns then about, you know, the integrity of the work and the trust with the stakeholders and so on as well, that you've kind of got that kind of long-term commitment there. So yes, concerns about that, and also the general kind of concerns about the stress and anxiety that can be linked to accountability, concerns about threats to academic freedom from increasing evaluation, and around kind of shaping the concerns that the tail ends up wagging the dog, that you're kind of, you know, shaping research agendas in ways that can kind of stifle creativity. So there's some of the issues that have been identified as kind of concerns about the impact agenda. And so leading on from this, the kind of the challenge for myself and for other people working in the kind of spaces that I do, provide that kind of impact leadership, is around how do we enable those benefits of the impact agenda to be realised at the same time as avoiding many of those pitfalls that I've just talked about. You know, we want to have a healthy impact culture, so kind of how can we do that? And Professor Mark Reed, who's some of you, if you're working in universities, you might be aware of. He's a leading expert in research impact, and he's just published a book just last week about impact culture, which I'm kind of devouring at the moment, and I can really kind of recommend that. And I thought I'd share with you this from the book, because Mark argues that there are 4 kind of key components to healthy impact culture. And the first one that he identifies is the impact needs to be based on rigorous, ethical, and action-orientated research. And that's about it being important not to sacrifice the integrity of the research through these kind of gaming behaviours that I talked about to get the easy impact wins. And, you know, as many researchers, many of my colleagues who developed impactful work will tell you that kind of stakeholder trust is vital, and this can take many years to develop. And so using people to kind of support impact development and then dropping them like a stone potentially when the impact case study is in the bag would be a really unhealthy impact culture. It's really important to still be really kind of rigorous and ethical about the research. So that's a critical factor. The second one is around healthy impact cultures are underpinned by the individual and shared purpose, identities and values of researchers who create meaning together as they generate impact from their work. I think this is such a key point, and one that I always emphasise in all of my training, that a healthy impact culture doesn't make you feel like you're being steered off in a different direction to the one which really drives and motivates you, because, you know, that's not really helpful to anyone to kind of, you know, for that to happen. So but if you are working in university, then there are clearly advantages if you can manage to align your aims, your intrinsic motivation, your own aims, with the kind of the wider institutional impact objectives, because of the kind of the level of kind of funding and support and so on that can bring. His third point is that he talks about that healthy impact cultures facilitate multiple impact subcultures that develop amongst different communities of researchers, and that these are kind of quite porous and dynamic, so that communities can kind of come together with certain where they've got common interests and so on, but that they are subcultures rather than one overall kind of impact culture. And to be honest, this one was a bit of a light bulb moment for me, because there's a lot of talk in universities about developing a research culture and an impact culture, and that's in reality there will never just be one research or one impact culture, because that's so complex. There's so many people working on so many different things, different researchers in different disciplines and so on. So I find that a really helpful kind of notion to think about. Impact subcultures, and I thought also a good thing to think about in terms of practice-based research, because I think that forms a pretty strong subculture in its own right. So yeah, that's I think quite a useful one. And the fourth point that he makes is around healthy impact cultures are enabled with sufficient capacity, including skills, resources, leadership, strategic and learning capacity. And so really that recognises the vital part that the research environment plays in developing impact culture, which also reinforces the core reading for this session, where there's similar points made about the importance of the environment for research. So for the rest of my part of the presentation, I wanted to focus specifically on issues for practice-based research, beginning with a few challenges that colleagues have identified. So many challenges, particularly if we're looking at impact case studies. These may not resonate as much, perhaps, if you're not in that space around kind of developing impact case studies and things. But certainly from the point of view of the impact case studies, many of the challenges associated with that are common across disciplines. So people struggle with having the time to do it, having the resources, linking the research and impact, evidencing the impact. They're kind of universal challenges experienced by everyone working on impact case studies. But I think also there are several challenges which, whilst they're not unique to practice-based researchers, they are, in my experience, quite sort of common and relevant. So I'm going to kind of highlight them along with the square peg in the round hole images. I think it can sometimes feel like that, especially for those people who are involved in co-production as part of their approach. So I think that the first point is that the uncertainty over the value of impact through public engagement and how to evaluate such impact. And this may be relevant to anyone sort of working on kind of evaluation and so on of their work. So impact from practice-based research frequently involves co-production with relevant groups and communities. So very much around public engagement. And I think that generally there's been quite a bit of uncertainty across the sector about how well we can capture evidence of the impact of public engagement and to what extent it's going to be valued. And I think that one of the keys here to addressing this point is to understand that public engagement isn't impact in itself. It's a pathway to impact. It's activities that you do in order to make a difference. And so I think that to demonstrate the value of the public engagement, whether it's for REF or for wider purposes, I think we need to become more skilled in evaluating public engagement, and ideally in a way that embeds that evaluation as part of our kind of practice. And I've put a link on the slide because I assume the slides will be shared and things afterwards, but there's a link on the slide there to an article that focuses specifically on evidencing public engagement, which I think is quite a helpful one, which people might want to have a look at if you're interested. But I think there's also sometimes an issue over how to capture making people think differently. I think that's a particular challenging one, which I think often as practice-based researchers, that's partly what you're trying to do, is to challenge people's view on something, the way that they think about something. And I think addressing this is something that Colette will, I think, touch upon in her presentation, but it's all about kind of taking it a step further and encouraging a change in behaviour in some way. But of course, that change of thinking is still important, an important part of the process. So the second point is very much around the REF impact case studies, so you can happily ignore that one if case studies are not something that you had to grapple with. But practice-based, but also not just practice-based, but any co-produced research is often really kind of challenging to align with the REF impact case study requirements. It's definitely not impossible. You know, with lots of people are doing it, and we're learning more and more about how to do that effectively. But it's partly because all case studies have to be based on underpinning research which reaches a quality threshold. So it's a 2-star quality threshold, and it is more challenging to demonstrate the quality of the underpinning research if it's based entirely on practice-based research with no traditional written output such as journal articles. It's just a bit more sort of difficult to do. And I think the other challenge is that REF case studies have separate sections for the underpinning research and the impact. But in practice-based and also in participatory and co-produced research, the research and the impact are very much intertwined. They're kind of two sides of a coin kind of thing. So and to make it fit in the template, we have to try to kind of untangle it and present it separately, which can be quite challenging and problematic. But you know, as I say, can be done. It's just a bit more difficult. So the final point I'll just mention there, which is one that was raised in the reading that was circulated, was the tradition of lone researchers in art and design. I think often it's sort of, individual people working on their own practice and so on, and certainly for rep impact case studies, these are quite substantial pieces of work, and had to be quite a large amount of impact. So it's definitely, again, not impossible to develop an impact case study as a researcher working on your own, but it is challenging to do. I was incredibly impressed when someone's been able to develop an impact case study as an individual. But it also, so it's perfectly legitimate to do that, but very challenging. And if you are driven to develop your impact, then it's well worth considering how you can kind of collaborate with other people and thereby kind of building your capacity. So, although I've kind of acknowledged those kind of few challenges, I'd also like to identify what I perceive as some of the opportunities for practice-based researchers. And these are some of my kind of reflections on it, and I welcome feedback on them. As I said at the start, I'm not a practice-based researcher myself, and so I'd really welcome the kind of the thoughts and expertise of those people who are. But the kind of opportunities that I see are partly that all impact narratives start with a real world kind of problem, and so it's kind of this being given that so much practice-based research tends to be challenge-led. That's kind of an ideal foundation really for building an impact case study or doing impactful work in general. So I've worked with practice-based researchers addressing all sorts of these real-world problems through their research. You'll hear soon from Colette about her research addressing lack of effective communication between patients and health professionals. So that was the kind of the challenge there. And other practice-based researchers at Staffordshire, for example, looking at the need for social and physical regeneration in our city, and many other examples too. And even when the aim is mainly around raising awareness or making people think differently, this is often linked to a wider purpose. So I think that's a really good foundation that you kind of start from. I think the second one is the second issue that I wanted to highlight is around the great interdisciplinary kind of potential. So the world is facing such complex challenges, as we all know, more than ever before, and it really calls for human collaboration to address these challenges. And I want to give you an example here. I did a training session last week on integrating impact into funding bids. And I found a funding bid that was a couple of years old, but it was an amazing UKRI funding call that was all about treescapes, and it very much required a cross-disciplinary approach. They were explicit about that proposals must take an interdisciplinary approach that crosses research council boundaries. Any proposals just within the scope of one research council would be out of scope, will be rejected. So, and as well as focusing on new technologies and methodologies and number crunching environmental and kind of socio-economic data, it also called for the incorporation of local community perspectives and collective memories, which have the potential to reveal many previously hidden properties and trends and create a richer understanding of different treescapes. And I thought that kind of thing would be a wonderful kind of opportunity for a practice-based researcher potentially. So, and as I say, as well as Colette's research, we also heard earlier in this seminar series from Staffordshire University's Associate Professor Michael Branthwaite about his powerful and very impactful collaboration with researchers in the Centre of Archaeology here. So that's another example of tremendous sort of interdisciplinary potential. And I know that recording is obviously available if you missed it, but it's that's one to look back on as well. So yes, that was the another kind of dimension. Another theme that I felt was really so significant and relevant for practice-based researchers was around co-production. So numerous Staffordshire University impact case studies include co-production, including several from practice-based researchers. And I think that's one of our institutional strengths and certainly a big focus of the C3 Research Centre. Again, Colette's going to provide you with a fantastic example shortly of a co-produced practice-based research. So I'm not going to say much more about it here, except to flag it as a big sort of impact theme for practice-based researchers. The next one that I wanted to touch upon was evaluation. So as a practice-based researcher, you are likely, I think, to have an amazing methodological toolkit that you can use in evaluating impact. And that impact evaluation can be developed as an integral part of the research process. So it's not something additional requiring all new skills. And as examples, impact could be captured in a film or a play. So verbatim theatre is one approach that kind of springs to mind. Films, photography, all sorts of ways. I think that impact can be captured through practice-based research. And again, I've put a link to a publication there that kind of expands on that a little bit more. So the next kind of area that I wanted to touch upon, a different one, is kind of place and placemaking. So I've been preparing a presentation for another session next week that's all about impact and placemaking. And this is a topic that's quite a focus at the moment with all of the talk about the levelling up agenda and so on. And also many universities, including staffs, place a lot of emphasis on their role as a civic university, and that's also linked to place. And to prepare for the presentation that I'm doing, I did a bit of a straw poll kind of survey amongst members of the Association of Research Managers that I belong to that are running this seminar series to find out about the sort of a role that place played in REP 2021 case studies. And art and design case studies featured really heavily in examples that were given in response to my questions. So, and to be honest, this really wasn't a great surprise to me because I've seen so many examples myself of research-based arts initiatives that are focused particularly on the regeneration of Stoke-on-Trent here that have been led by academics and by arts organisations as well. And I think also, I think a particularly powerful aspect of this is the way that the arts can kind of connect the past and the present and the future of a place and its people. So I think that there's kind of loads of potential there. Finally, I think the other kind of thing I wanted to highlight is narrative and storytelling. So again, as practice-based researchers, many of you work with narratives, whether you work in film, photography, creative writers, obviously, and those kind of skills are just really, really valuable for impact because impact case studies are effectively kind of evidence-based narratives. And when you apply for funding, you're developing a narrative that is actually quite formulaic. When it comes to impact, you've got the kind of the problem and the potential solution and your stakeholders and your activities and your impacts and your evidence. And likewise, when you evaluate impact, especially impact resulting from public engagement, you're very often capturing people's stories. So again, I think that's a really strong sort of building block for impact. So as I say, if I've missed any kind of key impact themes that intersect well with practice-based research, then I'd love you to mention them in our discussion time when I'll also respond to any questions that you have about what I've discussed. But for now, though, I'm going to hand over to Colette, whose practice-based research impact is certainly strongly linked to many of the themes that I've highlighted. So over to you, Colette.
Yes, thank you, Agatha, for inviting me, and thank you for the audience that's come along to listen to my talk today. Okay. So the case study that was put in for the RAF last year was on sex, cancer and art, textile activism, empowering patients and challenging health professionals. So it was seen as a sort of an activism project because we were looking at unorthodox and creative ways of finding solutions for an identified problem. And also empowering a disadvantaged group, which were cancer patients. Okay. Yes, it needs to go on. Okay, that's it. Yeah. The case study really was developed from my passions and interests. So I didn't kind of invent anything for the impact case study. It had actually started through things that I was really involved in. I'd already been exhibiting for over 30 years, and as I said, I've said at a lot of international museums, galleries. And my work had really looked around communication anyway, very much looking at how women kind of make decisions and react because of the underlying conformity that's expected of them in terms of religious and social expectations. So that was, because I was working in communication, it was then going to lead on to what I would do in my later case study. So it actually started because I had a friend and colleague called Dr. Josie Butcher, who's a psychosexual consultant. She's located at Cheshire Rural Partnership NHS Trust. She was very interested in my work and in what I was doing. And she asked if she could do some work with me so that I could help think about how to visualise problems and look at relationships within families, and maybe think about how she could do it in a more abstract way rather than just through using family photographs. And this was very interesting for us both to work together from someone who hadn't got any arts background but wanted to kind of see how she could use that in her practice. And that became part of this interdisciplinary project whereby we just said, well, why don't we see if we can work together in a more professional environment with CWP. Oh, gosh. Sorry, I'm going a bit fast here. Yeah, so our underpinning research was really based around the problem of problems that people have after cancer with their sexual relationships. It was very much something that's difficult to talk about. Health professionals found it very difficult to talk confidently with their patients about emotional and physical side effects. And it's known that 70% of breast cancer patients have sexual dysfunction. And NICE and the government were already highlighting this as an issue, that women were disadvantaged in terms of their health care. Sorry, I keep jumping a bit fast. Okay. Yes, a bit of a side mix up there. Sorry, I'm just not quite used to this. There we go. Yeah, it's just a bit sensitive, the last talk. Sorry. So we talked about the actual underpinning research. So there was a conference that Josie was involved in, an international conference on sexuality and cancer. So I got to get together a team of artists who looked at loss and grief just in a very general sense. We took the work to the conference for health professionals, about 200 delegates, and as part of the conference they had to take part in an experiential workshop with us. And this meant that they were presented work around things they were dealing with, but they didn't understand what they were looking at because we were using such a different language. But then a lot of discussion started and we evaluated it. They found it extremely interesting and felt it'd be very good to kind of use that to develop their thoughts about how they could talk about work. And from that, we then went on to develop a group which we call Common, which is Communication, Medicine and Art. And so through that, I put a smaller team together, and we're working towards the next conference that was coming together, which was on prostate cancer, sex and prostate cancer. So the way we worked with this was slightly differently, in that we had access to a group of prostate cancer patients who talked a lot about their problems, and so gave us some narratives to work with. We then responded to those words that they'd given us, their ideas they'd given us, and made work. So it was much more coming from their emotive ideas about how they felt. So we went on to produce work, and again, taking it to the next international conference, where again, we were now working with health professionals, and we were working in a subject of their expertise, where they knew all the health problems, but as it found out, they were not as aware of the emotional problems, and they also felt quite disempowered because they didn't necessarily understand our work. As you can see, it's quite sort of abstract, quite conceptual, and they had to engage in conversation. So once they engaged in the conversation, they were able to then see perhaps they weren't seeing as much about the difficulties that their patients were having. So I've just included one of my pieces of work. So it's based on a lover's chair that's been reconfigured with 2 bedroom chairs and this large, what should be a comfortable armrest set between the 2 of them. But when a pair sit in the chair, they're totally unreachable. They can't see each other, they can't touch each other. And so there's this kind of awkwardness in the relationship. And this piece of work was then used by St Luke's Hospice for their teenage and sexuality area of their hospice, because they felt it really summed up this idea of that difficulty in relationships. So at this stage, it wasn't an impact case study. As an artist, we're very used to looking at quality of success measured through the status of venues, catalogues, papers, and very much an emotive response to our work. Whereas within impact, it relies on evidence of how good something is through actually being able to measure and evaluate. So at this stage, like I say, it wasn't a impact case study, but we were evaluating all the way along, and we were getting really interesting feedback. And the health professionals, which is in the paper that was in the reading list, were so positive about how they realised that they needed to listen more. They weren't aware of some of the things that were coming across in the work, and they needed to be much more aware of people's feelings rather than just thinking it's just about the physical body. So the findings of, as I say, have been published, and then the work that we produced has been used as a tool by Macmillan for training days at Christie's and Edge Trust. So the work is all part of when they're training health professionals around sexuality and cancer. Our work takes part of the presentations, and the actual pieces can be borrowed as well for study days. So although the emotive responses were very moving and positive, this part, which isn't actually the case study that went forward, would have benefited from a longitudinal evaluation, and really just asking really to the point questions like, what has changed in your practice? What effect has this had on your communication with parents? Rather than the more emotive things that we were getting. But by the time of the case study, we were able to get more of this kind of measured evidence. So following on from the prostate cancer, this is the main RAF submission that we did. We knew there was a conference coming up on sexuality and breast cancer, and that we would be working towards that and working towards a tool to help patients and health professionals. So again, I put together a small team of artists. We had breast cancer patients from Staffordshire Cancer Centre who were going to take part in a collaborative project with us. And I also had supervision from people from Head of Research of Psychiatry at Stoke Royal, research fellows in mental health, consultants in psychology. So I had regular meetings with those supervisors along with Josie to present what I was doing and get feedback from those professionals. And that was great as a kind of collaboration as well going on alongside the research. So I was getting a lot of input from health professionals about how they felt things were developing. So as I said, 70% of the problems, patients have problems with sexual dysfunction. And I think what most people don't realise is that after the treatment for cancer, women's vaginas and vulvas become very, very damaged. And to experience sexual intercourse can be extremely painful for patients. There's a lot of things that can be done, but it tends not to get signposted, particularly at an early stage where a lot of things can be done to help women, help their partners. So that's why we took this on as a challenge, very specific to breast cancer patients. So we had ethical approval. It did take us 6 months to get it. It was quite in depth to get it, but that did give us a chance to be very focused with our questions and to plan the research. So we asked 3 questions. The ethical approval. Do health professions adequately discuss the sexual consequences of breast cancer and its treatment with patients? So again, very, very direct questions that we knew then we could measure. Can design action using metaphor for patients force develop a tool to empower patients, open up conversations and challenge health professionals? So again, what could we develop? A long-term tool that would help future patients and future health professionals. And also see if we could work with patients in an innovative way to get them to express their feelings. So I organised a sort of framework for the research, and it was going to be artist-led workshops and introducing female cancer patients to our work, and also enable them to be able to develop their work through knowledge. As an art textile practitioner, we do use references to textiles within our work. And textiles is usually one of the first things to touch your body, the last thing that touch your body at the end of life. It shows all sorts of different statuses of cultural heritage. It's used in weddings, it's used culturally, like in foot binding, we wear uniforms. And if you think about almost everything in your life, is evolved around textiles in some way from everything within your home. So it's very easy then to think about textiles as a metaphor for other things that you might want to talk about. So what I did with the patients when we first met them, had a really interesting conversations and introduced them to the language of textiles. And what I did was I actually looked at how their journey of cancer could be related to textiles. So we looked at how patients are prepared before they go into surgery. Things are removed from the body, they're stitched back together, they're often padded, and all those things are things that happen within textiles. So we made a dictionary of the surgical procedures alongside the actual procedures within textiles. And this then gave us the patients confidence to feel that they could make things. So we had a lot of conversations with the patients, and they were very moving and quite upsetting. But one thing that I picked up on that they talked a lot about was the use of the hospital gown. They were absolute objects of fear and dread. So I made a series of miniature little gowns for the patients and said to them, you know, take these, do with them what you like, try and use some visual language and enjoy them, and come back and talk to us about your feelings. So this patient made the miniature gown, covered it in flowered fabrics, made it very pretty. She looked very feminine before going into surgery. And then the aftermath is the opening of the gown, where she shows her own disfigured mastectomy. And around her genital area is a no-go sign that's surrounded by barbed wire. So a very, very kind of striking image that really makes you kind of stop and think about what that patient was going through. They also talked about the cancer being a journey, feeling very alone, zigzagging across from area to area and then just being left to get on with it. And they all said nobody tells you about what's going to happen to your sexual system, how it's going to be damaged, and you just have to get on with it. So they made boats, and then that gave us a really good way of having conversation with the patients. Another response was a patient who's here. She was making a piece again with a penis surrounded by razor blades, which is how she felt it was. But she actually was making it while her husband was there. And she said for the first time they had a real conversation about what was happening in their relationship. She was trying to make it in papier-mâché, and he just turned around and cried and said, let's go to Hobbycraft and get some Fimo and we'll do it properly. So what we realised is these objects could be very good at helping people talk through having something in between them. And I'll talk about that towards the end of the talk. So the patients found it a very safe environment. They talked a lot about hairdressers being very supportive when they couldn't talk to their doctors, and hair became a very important part of what we did. So I made work very much around hair and playing around with the lack of function and actual hair. So again, very much working from the patient's voice, working with them. The collaboration, we'd take the work along. So in this piece, I'd made a piece and they were like, well, when your hair comes out, it's not nice. So a patient gave me a hair, which was like a little brittle nest. It was really so sad. So I made a piece with it, and then they just went, no, please, it's too obvious. It's not what we want. So collaboratively, it was really good. They were giving ideas. We were trying things out, working out what was going to succeed. So just some images of the collaboration where they were very much talking about their anxieties. So this work was then taken to the next conference, where there were 200 delegates, GP surgeons, and again, we showed them the work, which was their specialism, but without any context. And they then engaged with us in conversations about the work. And the result was very impactful in that they said it illustrated things they weren't aware of. It made them feel about experiences that they need to think about a lot more. So we knew from all the evaluations, 198 of them, that we were making an impact at that point in time on their feelings. But then we went into longitudinal evaluations and testimonials to see how it was being impacted sort of 6 months, a year later on. And so in terms of narrative and storytelling, which Jackie's talked about, the health professionals did think that actually hearing the patient's stories gave them much more vividness and depth about the problems, and the workshops actually speak much more than words, and it really touched their souls. So they were very emotive about it and explaining, how it did impact on them at that time. And long-term testimonials, we got things to say how much they changed their practice, having greater levels of empathy, listening to patients, communicating more, and really considering lots of loss beyond just the obvious things that they considered. Christie's NH Trust bought some of the work, and they use it in their within their clinics. This is one of the pieces, was visualizations of damaged vaginas, which I made in collaboration with Elizabeth's cousin Scott. And so these objects, patients are asked to handle them, help them understand how they feel, that's what does happen. It helps partners who are with them understand how the women are feeling, and creates conversation, and a lot of the patients benefited in that after a session of working with these tools, they no longer needed to be referred for future support. And also new members of staff handle the objects introduced to them to help them understand how patients feel. So this was very much a physical tool that we made for health professionals. The work has also been taken, the actual the physical work is used at study days, so over 600 delegates have seen the work and taken part in study days where they've been able to see the work, and it's been selected as an example of leading innovative practice in the NHS. So the focus group patients, which I'll just finish on, we evaluated all the way through the different things we were doing. One of the things that came across a lot was how they felt they had really increased their confidence. They could challenge health professionals. They felt they could actually seek help. It wasn't just, okay, I got over cancer, I've got my life, how dare I ask for more? They felt very, very positive about what they were doing. And it equipped them to talk to health professionals. So then we had a lot of stories about what they were able to say to health professionals, how they were able to engage with health professionals. And there was a lot of very positive outcomes about patients saying they demanded that they didn't have to wear the gowns during consultations, only for examinations, and they said due to that they felt very respected by health professionals. So health professionals were changing their practice because of the demands of the patients. Some of the focus group have become patient advocates. They've been working, doing talks with me. We did a talk at a specialist hair centre where patients can have wigs and their hair scalps looked after, and we talked to them, showed them the work, got them involved, and they very much evaluated it as a really excellent outcome to be able to discuss these things. One of the other patients was quite a shy patient, through feeling very empowered by what we've done, addressed an audience of 200 people and talked about the positive impact of the research. And she talked all about what she'd learned, what she'd done, she passed it on, and we made a piece together about her journey through the hospital, which was presented at the breast cancer research event. And we've done talks and experiential workshops for breast cancer patients. So again, we've now got the tools that we can take to places, engage with patients. I've also done some public engagement at King's College London and Department of Midwifery and Obstetrics, and delivered papers. And finally, I co-produced a website with patients, and within that there's a downloadable notebook that the patients can use with all the quotes from the patients, places where they can put notes, what they want to say to the doctor, and lots of things about using different language so that you feel confident talking about what you need to talk about that might be embarrassing or difficult. So that was a physical tool that we made with the patients. So that's the impact case study. And just 2 slides to show what I'm doing now. I've worked with Catherine Downey, a photographer, very much on, I do all styling and make costumes and clothes, and these are just a few examples of some of the things I've done, very much about ambiguity. So the next thing looks completely different, but what I'm looking at now is a celebration of women's health. I've become quite upset about a lot of things on social media about how women should care for their vaginas, with Gwyneth Paltrow perhaps being the worst culprit about steaming vaginas, which is the absolute worst thing you can do to your body. So I want to do something very celebratory. So these are just initial, almost like how I make visual statements myself. So I'm building things up and beginning to work on some toiles. These are tiny toiles where I'm going to build some very extravagant costumes around the body, and looking at a celebration of women's shape and body. So that's really all, really just to say, if you can work with your passions and interests, talk to research staff, they're fantastic. and they'll help you with opportunities for funding. Fed evaluations, no matter how little at the start of the project, all the way through, because that helped me so much to get to where I was. Working a hub, interdisciplinary, whatever word you want to use, working with other people has been fantastic. And impact is just proving you've changed something for the better. And that's all. I thought it was so complicated when I started, but really, did you make anything better? And that's it, really. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jackie and Colette. I am so grateful. These two presentations, they're not only fascinating, but they just really go so well together. So what I will do, given we only have 20 minutes for questions, if that's okay, I would just like to ask one question to each of you, and then we open for questions from the public. But again, thank you so much for kind of giving us really nice overview of what impact means in practice-based research. So perhaps I would like to start with the question to Jackie, since you were the first one presenting, and I'm sorry if this is a difficult question, Jackie, but I'm kind of trying to bring it all back to the reason why we're running this seminar. So the reason we're running it is because I'm trying to figure out what's the best way to train and prepare new researchers for all the elements of research they have to plan for. So my question is, how do you prepare young researchers or PhD students to think about impact? At what stage do you ask them to plan for it? And should impact be the top priority for research?
Yeah, thanks for the question. That is a really good question. I do offer training to the PGR students and other early career researchers. I always kind of stress that that actually, when you're doing your PhD, that completing the PhD is the primary thing, and talk to your supervisor before sort of having great kind of impact ambitions, because I think I'd be wary of telling somebody to focus too much on impact at that stage, depending on the design of their PhD. There have been some fantastically impactful PhDs, in actual fact, but it depends on the kind of the design of it and so on. What I do encourage people to do at that stage is to kind of start with small steps, really, and think about, how you can communicate your research to even just to kind of create some targeted messages and things. So kind of doing, short summaries of the insights, and thinking of your research insights, thinking about who that might be relevant to, and targeting it accordingly. Whether that's via Twitter or emailing an organisation or something like that. So yeah, I think overall, thinking about small steps first, talking to your supervisor, but also being mindful of the possibilities, because I think actually, from my own experience of doing a PhD, I think that had I at that stage of doing my PhD been a bit more focused on the impact of it at that stage, I think I would have actually found it a less isolating experience, and I would have found it quite helpful.
Yeah, I have to say I agree a lot with what you're saying. I realize it took me years to actually make the most of the impact from the project I did as my PhD, which is quite interesting. So if I may, I would like to ask another question to Colette, which kind of links to the question I asked to Jackie, really. So first of all, it's just an incredible piece of research, and I actually took notes from the case study, from the reading you were kind enough to share. And I listed all the things you've done and all the things which followed. So it's just such a complex, multi-layered project. And obviously there's so many things involved. And you mentioned just some of them. You mentioned the website, you mentioned the downloadable booklets, you mentioned the workshops, but there was so many different elements to it, and the way you disseminate it afterwards. But one thing which really made it really interesting for me was when you mentioned, in relation to your creative and artistic background, how different the impact for someone who works in arts and measure impact in a kind of artistic way, how different it is to what you do for research. And I was just really interested in how this transition happened for you. And then I would like to bring it back to this idea of how you planned for this kind of really powerful impact for this specific project. So I'm sorry if it's again a complicated question, but it's just really fascinating.
Well, it is interesting because I feel, having worked in creative practice for so long and kind of tackling quite a lot of subjects, when it came to actually developing it, it just seemed another exciting stage to take up something else that had another concept, but would be dealt with in a way that I was thinking. So when we were actually working, it was very much in the ways that I like to work, but it meant that we were challenged because of the subject matter. And I think particularly when it came with the breast cancer patients, I thought I'd had quite set ideas about what I might want to do. And then I realised it didn't really fit in. So I had to rethink how I was going to work. And that was what was really exciting, was because, I would never have thought of working with like mini gowns and boats and doing collages around hospitals and that kind of thing. But it was prompted because we were given information from patients that I would never have found anywhere else. And so in a way, I found it really creatively stimulating, but I don't think it changed the core of how I worked. It just gave me a really exciting new kind of subject matter. And I think working collaboratively with patients and other artists and medical people, they question all the time what you're doing. So you do feel that you're sharpening up your practice in a way. Does that kind of answer?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I think what you're saying here, which I really relate to, is how the nature of collaborating with other people, whether they're artists or just participants of your research, really brings this other quality to your research, because you obviously don't know what's going to happen. It becomes really organic, and then bringing this back to impact. I think, I guess, when I ask how much of this can be planned at the beginning, of course, like it's a on purpose a naive question, because of course you have to plan it, but at the same time things will change, and that's how we all work using any kind of creative approaches. But it's just really interesting how the input from other people who work with you will shape what's happening. It's just really, really interesting.
Yes, because we did sort of say when we gave the ethical approval that we would have a tool, but we'd no idea what that tool would be. So again, it came because of what the patients wanted, and I had no idea it would end up as a website and objects. We didn't have any idea, so we were flexible enough at the beginning just to say a tool, and then it was really up to the patients and what we learned on the journey would be the best way to move forward.
Yeah, incredible. Can I just ask, how long has it taken you from the beginning of the project until the very end, until the very last, website being launched? Because it's such a complex project, really.
Yeah. Well, the whole thing was over 10 years, but the last, from the breast cancer, that was about 3 years, that breast cancer project.
That's what I imagine, because again, the amount of things you've done over there is just really, really impressive, as I said. So obviously it always takes time, and I guess that's one of the challenges which Jackie talked about in her presentation, which is time, and obviously for all of us working in academia, it's always very difficult to just really find time to to do enough research. That's one thing, and then obviously to focus on the strategies for impact and all the things which relate to this. So I think it's just really interesting to hear that the project altogether took such a long time. There's some great comments in the chat. So Vicky says that's a really good point about thinking about impact or integrated to make it less isolating. And again, that links back to the text we had about how researchers in creative arts very often feel, and Jackie talked about it, somehow isolated in this journey. And Vicky also says, I think Colette's work could equally be applied to practitioners supporting women going through menopause. And Regina said it was fantastic, really interesting. Other people said that before. I'm not going to read all the questions. I want to comments because I want to give people an option to ask questions. But Vicky also replies, oh, sorry. I'm just going to read it quickly. The sign of great impact that you think about how it can extend beyond the original case study, which I completely agree with. So is anyone in the audience have any questions they would like to ask or comment? Agnieszka, yeah.
Yeah, sure. No, thank you so much. I was also wondering, would we have possibly access to the PowerPoints? Because maybe it was my connection, but some of the presentations I missed. But it was fascinating, and thank you so much. And I think it was very rich and much to think about. I think that I suppose it's more because there's so little time. There's more. Well, I try with a question then. Jackie, in terms of, because there's so much of the work that you've shared with us, and it's so interesting and beautiful, but if I was going to ask you, what do you think your contribution to knowledge is, what would you say?
I think that depends on whether that's my own contribution or
I was asking the other colleague who was presenting.
Oh, sorry, Colette.
Oh, sorry, could you just ask the question again? What was my contribution?
Yes, because obviously the difficulty with the impact for a creative practitioner is that as we do the work, you know, even with groups and so on, that's kind of one thing, but in order, and it's wonderful, but in order for this to count as impact in terms of the academic structures, the first step really is to say, this is my contribution to knowledge as a research thing. And then you can say, and that's how it's impacted a community or something. And it is a huge challenge. That's the problem. Because often, first of all, things don't impact, creative things don't impact sort of at a drop of a hat. It you know, takes a while. I went to the Surrealism exhibition at Tate Modern at the weekend, and this is the global impact. When I teach my students, say the movement which has had probably arguably the most impact globally in terms of the history of art is surrealism. It's literally every single thing that one does, including your work, one could draw from this. This is massive impact, but even that, it didn't just happen boom at a drop of a hat. It was years before things started, you know, commuting, transmitting to each other and so on. So I understand the difficulty. I'm not trying to be difficult or awkward or a horrible manager or a horrible ref person, but the question still remains, what do you suppose your contribution is?
I feel the contribution has been through being able to let people know a lot more about some women's health problems through producing artwork. And therefore, it may not be global impact, but it is impact on certain groups of people. So I do feel that I've made a lot of health professionals aware of the problems, because it was amazing how many health professionals had no idea that breast cancer patients suffered from sexual dysfunction. So I do feel that, you know, probably, I think we rounded up about 2,000 health professionals, perhaps more when we were doing the figures. And certainly the patients and the patient advocates, it's something that keeps moving out there. And because the basis of it was artwork that got that information to be articulated, then that's how I feel the contribution is.
But could one also then ask how, I understand the public engagement and the translating of the knowledge which maybe was inaccessible to various people through your creative practice and through art, which I think one could say. But then I'm also wondering whether there would be a way of framing this in terms of the knowledge that you have created for creative practitioners. for the artist, meaning taking the something which is quite painful and possibly difficult for artists also to understand how to engage with this material. And so maybe the contribution to knowledge, one could say, was also using different techniques. And then the question would be, what techniques? What was the difference? How did an idea of one kind translated to another? And that too, so taking it maybe away from the medical practice, but rather to the creative practice, one could maybe try and frame it, your work, in terms of creating knowledge which is beyond the public engagement, and it's rather the impact on an artist. It might be possible to try and think about that.
Yeah.
Can I suggest your visual dictionary is an example of
that?
In terms of, I suppose the thing is, it's kind of getting it to the people outside of the health. So it would. Are you asking about it going beyond health professionals and patients? How you have that discussion with artists?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, obviously, there are ways in the future, because of my background of kind of working for publications, art publications and catalogues and exhibitions. But at the moment, I've just been very, very focused on getting this part done. And as I'm moving forward, working with a photographer, that could be something we could address in a different way.
I think there's some really fascinating comments in relation to this discussion we have, which really prove the point of doing this presentation. Thank you so much, Colette, Agnieszka. I think it's really interesting how, despite the amount of discussion we have in academia about the importance of impact, how still difficult it is to really capture what we doing sometimes, and I think this conversation is just proving the point. I'm just gonna very quickly read Vicky's, Becky's, and Lynn comments, because I think they're really important here. So Vicky says, I agree with Colette. I think words do not always adequately articulate a feeling, as evidenced here, where the textile examples, so the knowledge would be a greater understanding of psychosexual health, which could be extended in different cultures, because textiles equals international impact. Becky says, yes, that's what I meant, synthesis of creative practice into the project. And Lynn says, impact. What do you mean by knowledge? The empowerment of women to take charge and able to claim space in medicalized situations of their bodies, where they're so often disempowered, seems immensely important. The framing of knowledge can be problematic. So I think these comments and the questions kind of points us again to this idea of how do we capture, how do we evaluate, how do we measure, how do we prove, how do we demonstrate impact, so we can feel like it's obviously extremely impactful, there's no question, but what remains perhaps problematic is the way to evidence it in a way which fits.
Well, can I just say, I didn't at all mean to be, I think this is when you put it forward, any creative work as research, then this is the kind of job, and I'm sure Jackie might be able to help with that. This is why I want to see your presentation, Jackie, again, so I can think about it, because I think it's really important. But that's the challenge, and it really, it is then about words, and this is the huge conversation that we're continuously having. You know, why it's so annoying that you have to then go through this job of then thinking, okay, to what extent this is a contribution to knowledge, and what knowledge, which knowledge, and it's different knowledges. This is back to Donna Haraway, you know, the feminist, situating it in different knowledges that we contribute to.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about, Agnieszka, also links back to the actual definition of practice-based research again, and this kind of division between practice and spoken or written words. Again, it's we kind of, no matter what we do, no matter what element of practice-based research we talk about, we always gonna hit the wall when it comes to this distribution between what is that we're doing in terms of the practice, what is the role of practice, which is quite fascinating and frustrating at the same time, I think. And obviously we cannot escape the requirements of academia for the things we're doing, including impact. But again, I think bringing this kind of the conversations here and looking at examples such as Colette's work and Jackie's expertise here, I think is very useful because it hopefully points us to the right direction here. Yeah, we have another 2 minutes, so I don't know if anyone else, or maybe people who were commenting in the chat, anyone else would like to say something. No.
Can I also just briefly respond about you said about making the presentation available, and that's absolutely fine, and what I'll do, because I owe Colette a huge apology because she created the most beautiful presentation and then I merged them into one and it kind of really messed up her formatting, so I do apologise to Colette and take full responsibility for that error, but when I do share them I'll make sure they're separated out again and Colette's will be reverted to the beautiful presentation that it was before I came along and messed up some of the formatting for her. So, but very, very happy to share those. And
Agatha, maybe you could send them to us because they'll be large by WeTransfer or something, so we can really have a look at. Because I'd like to see the art properly as well, and have a real think for myself.
Absolutely.
How, you know, what to think, how to kind of, because it's the area theoretically that I'm working with and on as well. So I thought it was fascinating. Thank you both.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just gonna read one last comment and introduce what's gonna happen in the next session. So Vicky says the problem, it becomes a bit like gaming. For example, knowing what to say to prove it is impactful in order to satisfy the ref exercise. However, taking away the cynicism, it can be a way of extending out creative practice. Yeah, I think it's a really good comment. So yes, I'm gonna as always, once the seminar is uploaded to YouTube, I share the link with everyone. So I'm gonna attach the PowerPoint. So I'm gonna kindly ask Jackie and Colette if you could send the PowerPoint to me, and then I'll share it with everyone. So just really briefly, just wanted to say, sorry, this is the wrong PowerPoint, so I'm just gonna stop sharing. So the next session will happen on the last Wednesday of next month, which is April, and we're gonna have again 2 people talking to us about practice-based research in film this time. Really a couple of nice, interesting projects. So we're going to have Associate Professor Fiona Graham and Paul Ottey from Staffordshire University, and they're going to be talking about their own experience of working in film and as a form of research. So I'm going to share all the details. As always, thank you so much for today. I wish everyone a wonderful evening and afternoon. Keep well, and until the next time. Thank you so much.
You too, Agatha. All the best. Hope you feel better.
Oh.
thank you.